Welcome to the Speak USA podcast. I'm Cliff Zinkreff, your host. Let's learn about our democracy, how to protect it, and how to make it stronger. I do want to open with some comments about things that happened this week. We're all familiar with the shooting that happened and the death of Charlie Kirk. And I want to just say for the record, while we may have deeply disagreed with the positions that he took, we are here advocating for our democracy, for our institutions, for the U.S. Constitution, and the protection for all citizens of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that was wrong, and we condemn it. We condemn that kind of violence when it happens against people from the other side, when it happens against people from our side, when it happens against anyone who is in the United States. It's wrong, and we condemn those actions. So thank you for hearing that statement from us. Now, today we're going to be talking about a fairly serious topic as well, one that is affecting many, many people. And I am really pleased to have Soren Vaughn join us today. Soren, thank you so much for being with us today. Soren, you have a story to open with, and it has to do with work that you are doing related to what's happening with ICE in San Antonio. If you'd share that with us, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First, I wanted to start by talking about an experience that myself and another volunteer had while court watching recently at the immigration court here in San Antonio. We were there later in the day. Most of the cases had wrapped up by that point, and we were watching a woman who had already had her case dismissed, sheltering in this lobby with her two very young children. The youngest was probably around 2 years old. And they were in this lobby because ICE usually doesn't go in there. They're not supposed to, from what I understand. It's the waiting room for the courtroom. And they were hoping they could stay in there until ICE left, because ICE was right outside that door. And I mean, ICE ended up pushing their way in, grabbing the woman, taking her two children, and just loading them onto a van, driving off. And we're there asking questions, trying to get information, get the woman's name, all of these things. And we asked ICE where they were headed to, and they told us that they were headed to Dilley, which is one of the three main immigration detention centers right outside of San Antonio. And the conditions there are awful. It's a center designed to hold children, and there have been reports of serious medical neglect at this facility, and medical neglect of children that has, in some cases, resulted in the deaths of children around 2 years old. And it was really harrowing for us to see this woman going there, and I'm sure it was terrifying for them and the two children, being extrajudicially sent to this facility that could be a potential death sentence to these kids.
That's a difficult story to have seen yourself. Just so for anyone who may be listening who may not know, ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and I'm going to be shocked if anyone listening to this is not aware, but this is about the processing of people who have come to the United States and have been detained for some reason. Many have applied for asylum, many are refugees. I characterize that correctly?
Yeah, and this woman, because she was at an immigration courthouse, was almost certainly an asylum seeker. That's what most of these court cases are. So she probably had a good claim to refugee status and had that claim dismissed without really, any attention to the details of her case, without the judge going through everything they need to.
Indeed. Well, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you are making sure that the people who are coming to the United States, and many of whom are fleeing oppression, have valid reasons for being refugees, to make sure that we are treating them right, which unfortunately we're not. We're not treating many of them right. Before we get back into that conversation, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you?
I'm a local political organizer. I've been on a couple of political campaigns here. And my background, I studied political science and anthropology at Case Western in Ohio. And I've been doing a lot of organizing specifically around the immigration issue lately because it is by far the most pressing issue locally with the amount of ICE presence that we have here in San Antonio. But I also do a lot of other organizing. I help work with a radical bookstore. I helped organize the Pride Festival that we held there recently. And I'm involved in a lot of that kind of work.
What's a radical bookstore? I have to admit, I've not heard that exact term before.
Well, I mean, government censorship is getting worse now, especially in Texas. We're a place that has as many, potentially controversial political books, these, left-wing histories, political analyses, things like that. And we're also a community space. We do free food shares. We did a free back-to-school school supply drive. We're just trying to build a community around that store on the east side.
Understood. I don't know anything about the books you have, obviously, but I remember reading something lately that no country that has ever been a successful democracy has done so by banning books.
It's certainly not a good route to be a stable democracy.
No. Your understatement is noted, noted and appreciated. Just so many things right now are trying to chill and suppress our speech. It's why we're here, because we refuse to allow our speech to be chilled and suppressed. And I think you're doing the same thing. So thank you again for
we're
what
trying
you're doing.
to, for sure.
All right. Let's talk. Oh, and you mentioned, before we move on, you mentioned you've been involved in politics in other ways. I think maybe you were a canvasser. Is that?
I've done some canvassing,
right?
A lot of canvassing. I've helped train people to canvass. I've been involved with a lot of stuff, helped with a couple campaigns. Currently, I've been more involved with canvassing for Know Your Rights operations.
And Know Your Rights, that's for people
it's for immigrants,
for immigrants specifically, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. So not everybody knows what canvassing is. What is that?
Well, it can take a lot of forms. Usually I'm going door to door talking to people, whether it's about upcoming elections or, lately it's all Know Your Rights info. The Know Your Rights canvassing, we're literally just flyering the doors with, here's what to do if you see ICE, here's the rights you have in those interactions, here's the rights you have to not let people in your home without like a judicial warrant, and links to important resources for immigrants. And it's just flyers right now, but for political campaigns, it's talking to people, making sure they have a plan on when they're going to vote, and that they're aware of the election and all of its potential intricacies.
Right. I'm curious, maybe one more topic before we move on from here. There's so little awareness of local elections. Are you, like, you're canvassing and making them aware of elections that includes like these local elections that are happening for judges and so forth?
Well, the big recent one was the mayoral race, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of the canvassing efforts surrounds talking to people who consistently participate in local politics. So you're mostly talking to people who care about mayoral races, who might already have this on their radar, but are just underinformed. But there is also a good amount of that goes to targeting young people who, maybe it's the first election they're eligible to vote in, and you're trying to make sure that they're aware of it, that, you have a plan to vote, and, you're registered and everything. Like, you're just going through, this is the date of the election, here's some information, and trying to make sure people are involved.
Indeed. Well, let's move on and talk about what's happening at these centers that you are spending time at, also in the courthouses where you're spending, wherever it is that you happen to be, where you are trying to protect the rights of immigrants and protect our values of our democracy. Expand on that a little bit. What are these places? What are you seeing? What are you doing while you're there?
Yes, so the location that's got the most attention locally has been the courthouse. It's specifically an immigration court. And there, people are who have come into the U.S. legally as asylum seekers are presenting their asylum claims, right? They have reasons to be afraid of their home country and are presenting that to a judge. They're trying to get their cases heard, their asylum request approved. And the government is basically telling these judges to dismiss loads of cases so that these people can be apprehended, leaving their court dates, and then ICE will take them.
So you think that's what was happening in the story that you told earlier? That it was dismissed simply so they would be out and about and able to be detained again?
Well, ICE was right outside the door. In the story I told, the judge dismissed this woman's case, presumably knowing she would be detained by ICE immediately. Now, whether that was done under the request of the federal government or somebody working with them, or the judge just decided to do that, I don't know.
You don't know.
And we know both do happen. There have been reports of government-affiliated attorneys handing lists of cases to the judges to tell them, we want these ones dismissed.
And these judges, these are not local judges, correct?
They're the local immigration judges.
Okay.
I don't know what the process...
But not elected by San Antonio residents. Are they appointed judges?
I think they're elected. I wouldn't know off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. Something for us to go look up afterwards.
I do need to look more into that.
Or something if you're watching to go look up right now and let figure that out. But in any case. So anyway, back to you. That's one story. What are you doing while you're there?
The courthouse is what's gotten the most media attention so far. These people are not getting their day in court. They're going about the legal process and still being detained. The other ICE facilities locally, there's Crosspoint, which is ICE's check-in and processing center. A lot of people who do go through their court cases end up needing to prove that they're still in the U.S. or still in the state or the county or whatever. And that involves going physically to a location that's owned and operated by ICE to check in, to show I'm still here, and to sign on some paperwork, turn in some paperwork, whatever. And ICE has also been abducting people without trials, extrajudicially, at those check-in appointments. And that's gotten a lot less media attention. I think because it's not as this is a courthouse, this is, very out in the open. It's hidden in a little industrial park in town. And the other facilities locally are the 3 big detention centers south of town. I mentioned Dilley in that story where the woman and her 2 very young children were being sent. There's also Carnes and Pearsall, and these are all big immigration detention centers, and they're all privately operated. Carnes and Pearsall are operated by a company called the Geo Group, and Dilley is operated by a company called Core Civic.
And these are for-profit companies?
They're for-profit companies. They contract with ICE. They also often contract with our prison system. And there have been reports across the board of mistreatment, in some cases physical violence, inadequate food and water, medical neglect. And I've met personally with a woman in one of these facilities who has shared stories of a lot of that with me. And
Well, and I'm going to add to that, there's a substantial body of journalism that has been done on the for-profit companies that are running prisons. And I would encourage those of you who are watching, who are listening, to to go and verify what you just heard with that substantial body of journalism that is talking about these things that are happening.
Yeah, and while the conditions in the prisons are different than the conditions in the detention centers, it's also worth keeping in mind that ICE does have the ability to detain immigrants who have not gone through trial in prisons alongside these criminals at these private centers. So, anything you read about what's going on in the for-profit prisons could also be something that these immigration detainees are subject to. Even if they're not criminals, they're not supposed to be going into prisons, ICE still has that ability.
Yeah, indeed. And, I'm reminded as I listen to you talk, our Constitution, the way it's written, guarantees due process, not to adults, not to adults and children, not to people who were born here originally, and not only to citizens, but to anyone who is in the United States of America. That is their right to due process.
Yeah. I know the federal government is trying to weaponize their interpretation of the 14th Amendment to strip those due process rights from immigrants. But I mean, even in cases where they haven't officially taken away due process rights, these are still people who go to courthouses only to have their case not really listened to, just dismissed. And now they have no protective status. It's under the judge's authority to be able to dismiss a case, but they didn't get their day in court, and they're being treated like a prisoner, often sent to literal prisons.
Indeed. What's the bigger picture of what's going on at these centers? So we've talked a lot about the happenings that are there, right? That you're seeing these people, that these different things are happening. And we have a sense of who these people are. Do you know more about them? Do you have have you met it? Do you meet them, like the people who are at these centers, detained or reporting or whatever they're doing? Do you talk to them?
So we do meet with a lot of people who are going to get detained, who are not yet detained. At the courthouse, this is mostly asylum seekers, people fleeing countries that have been really destroyed by war or oftentimes
do you have
drug
a sense where they're coming from? Originally, I'm not worried about where they came from last, but do you know where they came from originally?
It seems like the bulk of them are coming from Central America and parts of South America, but there is a wide variety. The woman that I met with in the Carnes Detention Center is originally from Iraq. And her story is very different than most, but, a lot of these people, she crossed the southern border the same way a lot of the rest of the folks did. And, immediately, most of them are crossing the southern border. Where they came from originally, it depends. A lot of it is Venezuela, Nicaragua, fleeing authoritarian governments, instability. Now the U.S. is threatening to strike in some of these areas. So, there's a lot of things that are pushing people out.
That are causing them to come here. And, whenever we talk about a topic like this, I always find myself asking myself, if I lived in one of these countries and I was under threat and my family was under threat and my children were under threat, what would I do? Would I have the guts to get up and go knowing the risks? And, I know the answer. I'd like to think. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard position a lot of these people are in. A lot of them I know came here maybe a year ago, maybe 6-8 months ago, where things looked less potentially daunting for immigrants to the U.S. But I mean, a lot of them are still fleeing to the U.S. There's still people who are coming in who are, it does take a lot of courage, but it's also what I talked to about this woman from Iraq. She came when she came to the Americas. She was in Brazil, and she took the Coyote Trail, right? This smuggler trail all the way up.
Coyote referring to the people that are hired to bring people across the border.
Yeah, and engage in a lot of smuggling activities. And I mean, this was from Brazil all the way to Del Rio, right across the southern border. So,
And if you got any question about how long that is, open a map. That's a long journey, long journey. Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of that journey is very unsafe, and a lot of these people do have potential safe havens along that journey that they could choose to go to instead of the U.S. But a lot of them come here believing that, they'll be safer here. They've got asylum claims, and they're really trying to build something for themselves instead of stopping in a community that perhaps could take care of them, but isn't the life they want to live. They want to be contributing to America. They want to, be here legally, the right way, right? These are asylum claims. This is something that is under international law supposed to be protected.
Correct. And, maybe I think we'll jump ahead here a little bit, based on our plan. They are absolutely protected. And if you go back to World War II and think about how many refugees were on the move during World War II, and imagine what it would be like to not have a set process for handling that. I mean, so much suffering going on, right? And so you have these agreements that are formed between nations. You and I were talking about this earlier. We didn't get a chance to look it up, but we think it's probably a UN.
It's a UN treaty of some sort.
Treaty or something like that.
Yeah.
And once again, coming back to the U.S. Constitution, the federal government signs treaties, and those treaties are the law of the land. And it is the obligation of the federal government, the state governments, every government to be part of implementing these, and certainly not to oppose their implementation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Now we have both here a state and federal government that are opposing implementing treaties that the U.S. is signed on to. So, I mean, part of it is the treaties don't have any way to force the U.S. to comply. But we're in pretty open defiance of international law when it comes to how we treat immigrants across the board, whether it's not hearing their claims or the conditions we hold them in detention centers. And I mean, there have been international human rights groups that have argued that there's no moral way to detain children at all, that this is fundamentally destructive to a person's, growing up, their well-being, in ways that cannot be done in a humane way, in accordance with international standards. So
right, the impact can never be undone fully.
No.
Right, we can recover, we can find a way to be better, but that's a trauma that those children will live. Will carry with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. There was a really good piece of journalism done by the San Antonio Current recently about how people who were kids in Japanese internment camps in Texas, both, those stories carry with them. They carry permanent, memories of that, the dehumanization of it. And I mean, now they're seeing it happen again, miles away from where it did the first time, right? We're building new detention centers 20, 30 miles away from where these internment camps were. And I mean, it's the same thing. We're scarring an entire new generation of refugees.
And that you just point out something I hadn't even thought about, how traumatic that would be for someone who went through. I mean, it's been a long time now. I don't know how many are there aren't very many still living, but there are a few who are through those internment camps. It makes me want to bring one of them onto this show and ask them how they feel about what they're seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a group that was recently, I mean, survivors of internment camps who were protesting against the construction of a new detention center. So I'm sure one of them would be
they're seeing
willing
that.
to come on or something.
Yeah, indeed. So, you know, you could be spending your time doing lots of different things. You're choosing to spend your time doing this. And, you know, we've already touched on this, but I want to just ask you the question directly. Why are you doing this? Why is it important to have someone like you going to these centers, going to the courthouse, watching what's going on? What's motivating you?
A lot of the observing is really useful because it tells groups who have immigration lawyers or other legal resources where they need to be sending those resources. If we have an accurate idea of the number of people who are being detained at different facilities, we can direct those resources to the places that they're needed most. And in our work, we're also trying to make sure the immigrants are well taken care of. You know, at the Crosspoint Center that I mentioned earlier, those immigrants who go for their check-ins are often waiting outside in the Texas sun for 4 hours or more without water, without shade. There's some shade now, but it is minimal. And, you know, we're just trying to make sure that, A, they have access to know your rights information, they can stand up for themselves, and that, B, they're, you know, taken care of. They have water, they feel like there are people there supporting them. And being able to see how ICE moves, what they're doing. And tragically, they behave a lot better when they have eyes and cameras on them.
No, that's human nature, right?
It is, yeah.
So they're your eyes, your eyes and some cameras, yeah, watching what they're doing. And hey, let me turn that around for a minute too. It also highlights when they're doing it in, quote, the right way. And I'm not talking about, you know, the more abstract notion of whether we ought to be doing this at all, right? But I'm talking about an individual who is on that job, who maybe we would argue with them why they're doing that job, but they are trying to treat that individual right in that moment. The camera highlights that, and it also highlights when it doesn't happen. And I have no doubt you are correct that it happens less because they know they're being watched.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely hard to get like them doing it the right way on camera, especially with the protocols that have been put in place by the federal government lately. Even the ICE agents who try to be, you know, caring for these immigrants that they're processing, which sounds weird, but some of them kind of do. You know, at Crosspoint, we'll see people who work for ICE or with ICE, Department of Homeland Security, whatever, come out, give people their paperwork back who have, you know, not been detained. These are people whose paperwork is being successfully processed.
Right.
And celebrate it with them. They will be smiling. They'll be, oh, congratulations, here you go. And that, I think, I mean, it's important to get that on camera, but it's also important to get that on camera right next to the ICE agent who comes out and hands somebody who's waiting for a loved one just a bag of belongings and says, they're not coming back. We don't know where they're going yet. Here's their number. Look it up on the website tomorrow and it might be there. And, you know, that's also theoretically the right way to do it based on the federal government's current protocols.
Can you imagine what that would be like if that were your loved one? I cannot.
It's terrifying. People are, you know, I've seen that happen. I mean, it happens several times a day at Crosspoint. The most detentions we've seen, one day there was some 20 to 30 detentions, and it's that 20 to 30 times over.
Do they find out eventually where they're
They
going?
do. Theoretically, they should be finding out immediately, but right now, a lot of the processing centers, detention centers are pushing up against their max capacity, and the agents will often hand them a little slip of paper that has the names of 2 or 3 facilities, phone numbers for those facilities, and here's the website you can go to input your relative's A number, which is like their detainee number, and look them up to see if they're at that facility. And that's, it's terrifying. These people are not getting a clear picture of what's happening. They don't know where their relatives are going. And, the way I talk about these facilities, I say right outside of San Antonio. They're an hour drive or a little bit more. Hey, if you're this far north, they're a 2-hour drive, right?
Right.
A lot of these relatives are not going to be able to visit family, especially if they're working or if that was the breadwinner of the family.
And people who are more fortunate, they hear an hour drive, 2-hour drive, it's no big deal. But if you're not in that position, you have to think about where that transport's coming from, where the gas money is coming from.
And
that's not an easy thing.
Oftentimes it's the breadwinner who gets taken. It's, the mom will be left behind caring for the 2 or 3 young kids, and the husband is gone, and now you don't have the money to make those kinds of trips.
How in the world are they going to get there? Yeah. My goodness. Well, do you have anything else you want to add to why you're doing this?
I also think there's something that morally calls us to this kind of work right now. If you look at, there's a lot of really terrifying things going on in this country. A lot of things that I think people feel very motivated to get involved with. I think from my point of view, this is, immigrants in this country are the group that's being targeted the worst. They're the ones ending up in these 2,000 person bed detention centers where people do die. And most of these people are not convicted criminals. At the San Antonio courthouse, it's 31% who have been convicted of crimes, right? So I think there's such an egregious violation of international law, of human rights, calls us to act on this specific issue.
And, I think, by the way, thank you for doing this. Oh my God. You're right. It's a moral issue for me as well. And, I think about those who are citing faith-based values for all sorts of different things today. And I'm reminded of the phrase, the widow, the orphan, and the alien. And that we are going to be judged, and we are judged by how we treat those people, those who are the least fortunate among us, how we treat them. And I look at the example of how you are treating them, and I thank you. Just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for doing what you're doing.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Let's talk about our. Okay. We can't cover this topic without talking about the masking of ICE agents while they are doing their jobs. And this is very controversial, right? There's clearly if you go out to the general media, you're going to find 2 sides of this. And I'm just going to say right up front, I don't want any law enforcement officer to unnecessarily be unsafe. That is certainly not my perspective on this. They're just like the statement that we made at the top. Everybody in this country deserves safety. At a basic level. Unless they're actively breaking the law, then we need to stop them from breaking the law. What is your view of the agents wearing masks? And maybe it's not just about masks, but it's about the environment and the setting and the proper identification and accountability of these operations that are going on.
I think, first off, from a policy standpoint, the correct thing to do is what California has done, which is require these agents, because if they want to act as law enforcement officers, they have to, A, be following the law, and B, be identifiable, have their faces out, have
Right.
badge
And,
numbers or whatever.
and to be clear, so everybody understands, California has passed a law that
Yes.
requires law enforcement officers to not be wearing a mask while they're doing this. And I think there is some debate about whether the state has the authority to say that about federal agents, which is going to all shake out in the courts.
I'm
But,
sure
yeah.
it will. I think for the time being, the states should be standing behind that. And I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm not questioning their
yeah.
decision to do it.
That said, we're in Texas. Texas is not going to pass such a law. I think what we will see is, we do see a lot of ICE agents masking up almost everywhere, at the courthouse right now. You can't film inside. They're unmasked inside. They're masked as soon as they come out the door. And at all of their enforcement operations, any of the raids, any of this stuff, we do see them entirely covered. There's no badges. Oftentimes, the departments they have listed on their uniforms are different between different members of whatever ICE team is there. And I do get some worry from the ICE agents about being identified, right? If you look at the numbers, violence against ICE agents is way up. But a lot of that is because they're actively endangering the lives of so many of these immigrants who, again, haven't committed a crime, right? If we were enforcing the law equally, ICE would also be committing crimes by abducting these people, by, kidnapping, essentially. And while that is the federal government's policy right now, I think a lot of the ICE agents who are scared about retributive violence because of that need to understand that they're currently the ones perpetrating the violence. They're endangering immigrant communities. Immigrants are suffering serious health problems in detention centers, are dying in detention centers. And, if you want to be removed from that political violence as somebody who has been working for ICE, maybe for a decade and a half. Maybe you started when everybody had their faces out in the open. The best thing to do right now is to quit the job. That's a hard thing to say because like a lot of these people, it's a job. You need a job to keep paying the bills, feed your family.
Right. And they have tenure there, they have seniority, they have retirement coming, they have families, right?
But when your job both puts other people in the line of violence and potentially yourself, you need to recognize that you're not in the right line of work. You need to get removed from that situation. And I think a lot of it, based on their masking inside the court or outside the courthouse, not masking inside, is they're afraid of being put on social media, afraid of vigilante justice coming from social media,
which I'm going to add, for speaking for myself, is inappropriate. That should not happen.
And the best way to avoid that, because they're not that consistent about masking, they a lot of these people are getting into their personal cars at the end of the day and driving home. If they're afraid of that kind of retributive violence, they need to find a different line of work. And as horrific as that kind of thing is, it's because they're the ones currently perpetrating that violence, right? There's, when the law enforcement agency is engaged in so much violence, it is only inevitable that some of it's going to come back. And that's, we don't want violence on either side of that. But right now, violence is the policy of the federal government.
Yeah. And I have a need to add right here. Speak USA, the group, we are 1,000% against violence in any form as part of political discourse. That just flat should not happen. Let's talk about and we kind of jumped the gun a little bit a minute ago. We started talking about our country's obligation to this. But let's go back to that just a little bit before we're going to cover one last topic, which is the impact of immigrants on our nation over many years. But we have a legal obligation to allow people to come here and claim asylum. I talked about the World War II history of that. We have in my opinion, we have a moral obligation to do this as well. And we talked a little bit about where these people are coming from. I mean, do you know what kind of threats they're facing?
It's a wide variety of threats, but looking at specifically the immigrants coming from South Central America, it's a lot of gang violence, unstable governments. I don't think a coincidence that the largest numbers of these immigrants are coming from Nicaragua and Venezuela. And it's also a lot of destabilized regions that have been, areas that the U.S. government has been intervening in, whether it's our meddling in Venezuela and now our striking Venezuelan boats without,
Shall we stop here for just a minute? Every person deserves due process. Mm-hmm. We literally just executed 11 people, right? And if they were truly smuggling drugs, then they certainly, they didn't deserve what happened to them. I also would deeply disapprove of what they were doing, right?
Yeah.
But what if there were people on that boat who were coerced into that role? What if there had been family members on that boat that, because of some family dynamic, really had no choice but to be there, but really had nothing to do with what was going on? Everyone stop and think about what we just did there. It's inexcusable.
Yeah, and we would have had the ability to apprehend them after they had left Venezuelan waters if they were drug traffickers, and we wanted to give them some sort of due process. And, I mean, even if they were drug traffickers, I don't think that merits the death penalty, especially not extrajudicially. But, Trump's trying to say we should get the death penalty for drug dealers in this country, and that still seems remarkably unpopular. The vast majority of people don't want just random killings for selling drugs, moving drugs. Even if that's something we disagree with, there's correct ways to stop the flow of those drugs. And it's worth recognizing that a lot of the drugs that are being moved by these cartels are being moved into the U.S. by citizens. It's easiest to smuggle something in if you're a citizen. And the drug cartels are wealthy. They have a lot of money. They can hire people who are citizens who are desperate for that money, and they, get them to move the drugs across the border. So we're not making ourselves any safer. And we don't even know for sure that those 11 people were all drug traffickers, if any of them were drug traffickers. Maybe there's some evidence that they've recovered that I haven't heard about. But even then, like you said, there could be family members. There could be people who, maybe they commandeered this boat and they still have some of the crew on it, right? I don't know the specifics, but there definitely has been a lot of U.S. intervention in the region that has been destabilizing. Most of these cartels use American-made weapons. We have an out-of-control weapon industry there's guns everywhere in America. Everybody knows that. But we're also massively exporting guns to all of these countries that we have helped destabilize. And they're fueling our drug problems up here. They are fueling American drug addiction and making their money off of it to buy American guns. So I think our moral obligation isn't just, these people are suffering and it's the right thing to do, but they're suffering because of economic systems our government has been complicit in creating.
Understood. And it affects, we should absolutely be thinking about that and how it affects the policy that we implement as a country, and how, and you know what, I think what I resonate in the middle of that is that we are a stronger, better country when we are, first of all, working for our citizens. That's our first obligation. But realizing that when we work for the betterment of other countries as well, and we have good relations with those countries, that it is good for us and good for them in the end, right? That it, you know, that we truly can all be better. And oh my gosh, our country can sure be better right now, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we're working for. We're going to close this on a note of how immigrants have impacted the United States of America. Going back in history, going a little bit back in history, looking at it right now. What's your first thought when I bring that up?
Well, I have a very local focus in a lot of my work and a lot of my activism. San Antonio is 14% immigrant, right? And I believe 9% undocumented, 5% or not non-citizen immigrant, and then 5% like citizen. It's something like that. 14% immigrant. That's a huge portion of our city, right? When you're asking what immigrants have done for America, I mean, they've built 14% of the city minimum, right? They work 14% of the jobs here.
That's current immigrants, right?
Current immigrants,
not to mention that every one of us, unless we're Native American, right, is, you know,
we are
a few
filled
generations
with
back.
The children of immigrants here too, right? And that 14% current immigrant number, all of those people. I mean, ICE is targeting people who are doing things the legal way, the right way. Trump is talking about denaturalizing citizens. They're talking about, you know, going after anchor babies, people who were on DACA, all of it. And what happens to a city when 14% of its population is either in hiding or being disappeared? It's disastrous. And, you know, the amount of contributions, immigrants in this city, they're all over local government, all of our big local industries. You know, I think of the med center area, how much of that is propped up on immigrant labor. And would we be able to have a lot of those operations, a lot of those that are very economically beneficial for our city without the immigrant population?
Not to mention taking care of our health, just a little small.
This is a pretty, you know.
About like, hello. Yeah, indeed.
And when, you know, you hear the rhetoric from the far right about immigrants perpetrating crimes, I know they're
What's your stat on you talked about the crime rate of Irish immigrants from 100 or more years ago compared to the crime rate of immigrants.
Immigrants
today.
Now commit fewer crimes. You know, this wave of immigrants is they commit fewer crimes than native-born citizens. They commit fewer crimes to previous waves of immigrants. You know, even if you're looking at white immigrants from 100 years ago who were coming over in these big waves, right? What we're seeing now is native-born citizens far outpace immigrants in terms of crime, even illegal immigrants, as long as you exclude crossing the border, but that's not hurting anyone, right? The far right will talk about individual crimes committed by immigrants. I know they like to harp on about the... is that one woman who was killed. They made a law after her.
Which is tragic.
And it is.
It's tragic.
And it's horrible, but they only go after these individual instances of this because that's all they have. They only have a collection of anecdotes, and the data indicates that by allowing this many immigrants in, you make the country safer, right? The crime rate per capita goes down, which means you're less likely to be the victim of a crime.
We don't condemn the going after of that criminal for the crime that person did. That was horrible, and that person deserves justice. What we go after is when politicians then take that and use it to divide us.
Yeah, and it's like what they're doing with trans people now, too. There was this one trans shooter, and that's horrible. And then there's, 6,000 cisgender shooters, and they're not targeting that demographic group. They're only targeting the demographic groups that they have pre-existing reasons to dislike, and using these examples as justification, even if the statistics show that these minority groups are far less violent, far less dangerous, far less criminal than the general population.
Indeed. We are hearing the so-called leader of our country right now taking the horrible thing that happened a few days ago and laying the blame directly on his political opponents, just for no other sake than to divide us. Where was that kind of language when that happened to a Minnesota state representative? Where was it? He did condemn it, but then that was it. It was like one sentence and then the end, right?
And that's really all we got from him and from, I mean, most political figures in the country, even Democrats. It's one sentence condemning political violence when it happens against a sit-in Democrat elected official. And then when it's against a Republican pundit, we have not only the far right doing this, you know, we need to crack down on the left has gone too far. There's some trying to, you know, tie it to trans people again, despite the fact that, as far as we can tell, this kid, you know, not trans, doesn't have a direct connection there.
Right.
And we also have, you know, I think to some extent Democrats who play into that a little bit by, you know, creating a bit of a mythology around Charlie Kirk as some noble political actor doing things the right way. And then the Republicans take that and say, and the movement that resulted in his death, even though seemingly the left didn't, needs to be cracked down on. They want surveillance. And, you know, I mean, these detention centers, they've talked about putting political opponents there. They have sent political opponents who are immigrants there, like in targeted things, immigrants who wrote against our arming of Israel, even if they had protected statuses that go, you know, beyond the protected statuses that most of these asylum seekers have been singled out and targeted to be put in these. I mean, they're camps, right? This is it's serious.
Yeah, and I think you look back, you know, just to wrap this part up. I think if you look back at the history of the current administration, the prior administration of his, the constant, literally picking fights with people, saying things intended to divide. It's not It's not who America is at its best, and that is exactly what we are here to counter. We support those who support the democratic history, rights, progress, and institutions of our country. We oppose those who are trying to tear it down, and we oppose him. And we oppose all the thoughts that came from others, even though at the same time we protect their right to do it. I want to read a couple things here. You know, sometimes that's not like what you're supposed to do on a podcast, but I'm going to do it anyway because I really love it. And I got to give a whole lot of credit to ChatGPT here. If you credit me with anything, you can credit me with prompt engineering, I believe it's called. You know, knowing which prompt.
Put that on the resume.
Yeah, hey, there we go. That was pretty funny. So I was asking about the impact of immigrants. I asked ChatGPT about the impact of immigrants on nations. That's a rich and important theme in U.S. history. People fleeing oppression, whether refugees, asylum seekers, or forced migrants, have had an outsized impact on American society, culture, and economy. Outsized. That's why when you said 14% earlier, I was like, no, 14% is the base.
Yeah, that's current
right?
immigrants.
That's
right?
current immigrants. Right?
You know, you look at San Antonio, we're filled with the children of immigrants, and to an extent, like everybody here, you know, trace your ancestry back far enough. It's either, you know, settlers who came in from America or Spaniard immigrants who came in, or the descendants of Spaniard immigrants, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. You ever watch Finding Your Roots?
I think I've seen one episode.
Oh my gosh, what's his name? I'm feeling terrible. I can't remember. I can see his face clear as day, but I can't remember his name. Anyway, yeah, it's fascinating to watch people that we know and to find out what their backgrounds are. Here's something else my friend ChatGPT had to say. In many cases, these people were not just escaping, they were bringing talents, perspectives, and resilience forged under duress, which poured into America's science, culture, politics, and economy. I find myself wondering how many of these people we've chased away, how many we have not allowed to land here at the end of the day, who would themselves or their children would have made a huge impact. How many are choosing just not to come because watching the environment and the culture. And it makes me sad because I know that we have torn this country down. I know that the future of the people I know, of my family, my kids, my grandkids, is going to be somewhat poorer because of these changes. And I'm convinced that it's not going to last, because it is, at the end of the day, people are going to realize this is not good. We're doing something very foolish.
You know, we have to hope it doesn't last. I think on that note, if you look at this is the raid that was conducted on that Hyundai plant recently, some 400 South Korean, mostly immigrants, here on visas, being led away in chains. These are people who are skilled workers who are supposed to be here to teach a generation of American workers how to operate in these high-tech machining plants that are required to build a modern car, that are, you know, fundamental to our world of engineering today. And we're not only sending them back in chains, which is a disgrace to this country and to South Korea. I mean, their government was furious, but it's also setting back our progress on, you know, getting ahead of the curve with being able to produce those things, keep up with engineering here. And then we're going to go, you know, they're going to go back to South Korea, work on car parts there, and we're going to tariff those so they can't come in. And we're going to defund all of our sciences so we can't catch up. We're really hitting it at you know.
Man, I'm trying to end it on a good note here. You're
Sorry.
You're killing me. Unfortunately, I can't argue with anything you just said.
Yeah, we're really doing a ton of damage to.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Okay, as opposed to what you just said, as opposed to this. In the 19th century, the Irish famine brought immigrants here. There were Eastern European Jews and Chinese immigrants. Despite the Exclusion Act, Chinese Exclusion Act, there were Chinese immigrants coming here. In the mid-20th century, World War II and Holocaust, Hungarian refugees, and Vietnamese refugees, which interestingly is something, you know, without going into a lot of detail, is something now a little more personal to me. More recent, Somali, Cuban. How many Cuban refugees do we have here? And Syrian and Afghan refugees. I know one of the most inspirational pictures to me is that C-5, I believe, that took off from Afghanistan with the 850 people sitting in the, and just thinking about, you know, that, to me, that was a heroic act. I was talking with one of our prior guests about this, how that was a heroic act, and he noted that the heroic act was not so much the pilot, although I think it was the pilots, right? It was the people.
Yeah.
That whatever they had done before, and then they found their way onto that plane. And I sure hope they're being treated right here, and I hope they're finding their way in America, and I hope their kids and their grandkids make this a better country. You know, and then just some names. I mean, I've got way too much here to do it all. But just to read a list of names, this is sort of the, you know, the superstar list now. But Albert Einstein, Sergey Brin, Google, Madeleine Albright, who escaped twice, was a refugee during World War II and became U.S. Secretary of State. Henry Kissinger, Gloria Estefan, her family escaped oppression in Cuba. Right, fled the Castro regime. And then one that I didn't know, you know, I'm kind of a tech guy, Andy Grove. He's one of the founders of Intel. Was a Hungarian refugee. He or his family. I'm not sure. I'd have to go look that up again. So, folks, get your minds around the fact that immigrants have built this country, have renewed us, and think about the damage we're doing. But not only that, think about how you would like it to be and how we can change it. How do we make it better? got any last? Oh, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
It's the question that we always ask. We are in the mission of trying to help people who are watching what's going on, are as unhappy about it as we are, but see how things ought to be and want to know what they can do to make things better. You got any advice for that kind of person who's watching and hadn't figured out how to get engaged?
Locally, if you're in the San Antonio area, there's a lot of good groups who are doing a lot of work to help immigrants. The ones I would point to is the National Lawyers Guild is holding trainings for people who want to be legal observers at the courthouse. And that's similar to the work I described at the beginning, right? Trying to get information from people while they're in these hearings, before they're in them, after, document what happens in them. And I mean, it's a lot of work, and it can be harrowing, but it's important work, and we do need more people who are doing all different kinds of observing at ICE facilities. There's American Gateway. They are doing a lot of good work to help immigrants locally. I know they have somewhere on their website a path to join them as a non-lawyer volunteer. The San Antonio DSA are the Democratic Socialists of America, and they are currently also doing their own court observing. They're trying to have people there in the parking lot to do parking lot observing. And this is a good way to get the names and information of anyone who falls through the cracks. I know it's been understaffed lately, and allegedly that's been allowing ICE to get away with a lot more because they know there aren't as many eyes on them. There's the PSL locally, and they do confirming ICE sightings. They do reporting ICE raids. They have a hotline that they run to do all of that. And I'm sure you can find that information on some of their socials. I don't know if they have a website. They probably do. And I think they do still need volunteers for that operation. So that's another good place to get involved. And if you're not local, there's probably a lot of chapters of similar organizations wherever you are. The National Lawyers Guild is national. Our chapter locally is doing a lot of this work. I'm sure there's other cities across the country where they're doing similar work. And I mean, the DSA and PSL are both national organizations as well. And there's probably local immigrants' rights groups too. So, look at, most of them do need volunteers right now. And if any of that observing work is, I mean, it's tough to be there on the ground, and it also happens during most people's work hours. So if that's not something you can do, there is locally the DSA is doing in coalition with the San Antonio Alliance and Our Schools SA, Know Your Rights canvassing. We just had one yesterday, and I'm sure somebody will be scheduling the next one. That's not me, unfortunately, but these canvassing efforts to get people's, make sure they know their rights when they're interacting with ICE. ICE is getting away with a lot of this because people don't. And they're relying heavily on so-called administrative warrants, which is ICE giving ICE permission to come into your house or whatever, and just making sure people are prepared to deal with this, to, stand up for themselves is really important. So we're going to be doing big canvassing efforts, and the DSA is talking about scheduling their own canvassing efforts on top of that. So that's a good thing to get involved with. It's pretty low commitment. It's usually 2 hours on a weekend, walk around a neighborhood, talk to people about their rights. And so far, people have been very receptive to that. You're not really encountering hostility. People really like to see that there's this support for our immigrant communities and that we're pushing back against ICE.
Is there some place people can go to kind of a clearinghouse for these things? Any recommendation where they could go for this? Because I can give them one info at at speakusa.org.
Um,
You certainly reach out to us, and I'll connect people through. But if there's a
You can
more
do
is there a
that.
more direct way, please?
The American Gateway's website I know has a volunteer sign up.
Okay.
I think the National Lawyers Guild has their own volunteer sign up.
Okay.
And then for the DSA, anything that is needing a lot of public volunteers would be posted online on their social media. I use Instagram, so that's the only place I see them. But
And remind everybody, DSA stands for
is the Democratic Socialists of America. That's it's a national political party. Mamdani's a part of that. I think AOC has been. I don't know if she still is. Greg Kassar used to be a member until quite recently.
Okay.
So it's a
So
very
there's
large
three
organization.
places that if this issue is an issue that you care about, that you could connect. And seriously, I mean, go straight to them if this is the issue you care about. But if you're having trouble finding stuff, you could reach out to us as well. So, all right, Soren, you are part of a long American tradition of standing up for the rights of people who cannot stand up for themselves, or standing up for themselves. Women's suffrage, civil rights, so many more, right? Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for spending an hour with us on the Speak USA podcast. And to our viewers, to our listeners, I hope you guys have learned a lot about democracy today. That is why we are here, to help you learn and connect and speak up and to know how to give of your time and your money in places where that is impactful. Remind everybody we have a website. It's speakusa.org. We encourage you to go out and visit that website. And we encourage you to carefully think about what you've heard today, how you can be part of the solution. Please remember to speak for the USA. Thank you for being with us today.